Let's get started. Yeah, this is the landscape of consciousness paper teardown with John, Ryan, and Tasia. Why don't y'all introduce yourselves? I'm Liz Howard, founder of the Multiverse School and nerd on the internet. You can find me at lizthe.dev. And yeah, John, tell us about yourself.
Hey, I am a PhD in cognitive science, and I am a former professor, and a bunch of other shit. I'm pivoting my career, big stuff. So great time to
Education
talk about
radical.
consciousness.
Yeah.
Yeah, very radical educational, very free open source software, very, all these things, try and move. But, cognitive science gives you a lot of basis in philosophy, but I'm not really a trained philosopher or anything. This is a very much a learning experience for me too. So, but I have complaints and thoughts and things I think about many of these theories. So, I'll have some things to bring in.
Cool. Ryan, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. My name is Ryan. I'm a serial entrepreneur. Started the first data science school here in San Francisco, and I'm a software engineer and data scientist by trade. I studied genetics and neurobiology in college, and so have been really trying to apply some of those ideas and frameworks into how we're constructing neural networks today. And so I think the kind of confluence of both the philosophy of consciousness and the block and tackling of building these things in the real world is, I think, really exciting. And so
Hell
I'm
yeah.
very excited to have this conversation with you guys.
Yeah,
Majorly on board with that, and that's great.
heck yeah. Deja, tell us.
Hi, I'm Teja. I'm a person who is here. I don't really have as many things to my name, but I'm a machine learning engineer who has an interest in philosophy, statistics, how things work. The philosophy and statistics were my undergrad, but there's just a lot of things about like as being someone who's like hands-on with machine learning, in a sense, I guess. Uh, there's a lot of things that like bug me about it. So my goal is to learn enough to be able to do weird things that hopefully work.
Yeah, Tasia, I've worked with you for a little while, and I know that you've gone deep on actually a whole lot of these theories. And so, like, you're not, I know, it's maybe non-formal, but we're very like education radical here. And so I've literally had conversations with you, I think, about every one of these categories. You're no slouch. That's all I'm gonna.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just
And
not
Matthew, tell us about yourself. I just want to do some quick intros, but yeah, then we'll just rap about this paper. Oh man.
Oh,
Or yeah.
hello. Sorry, hello. I'm Matthew. I have a background in startups, VR, especially designing VR around the predictive processing framework, being that novelty is sort of the currency of your brain, and we should design around that within immersive applications. The idea being that taking something that's sort of familiar and then flipping it into something that's just really not familiar can be very powerful. So that's what I'm really interested in terms of brains. And I'm also really interested in taking a lot of these concepts that we're learning with the frameworks of mind and theories of mind and bringing them into LLM. So I want to combine these two things, human perception and then just hacking our brains on the AI side as well.
Yeah. Matthew's been riding deep with me, across this like large language model explosion journey that I've been, trying to surf and keep ahead of. So couldn't do it without Matthew. Also, is the resident knower of three-dimensional manipulation. So I love having somebody on board that can explain quaternions to me for the 88th time, um, with like a cool metaphor. So. Yeah, bunch of nerds here. I love it. Thanks for
Hey,
coming and being nerds. That's
it's great.
what we do.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah. So, yeah, y'all all took a look at this paper. What's that been like for you? Just popcorn it.
Overwhelming. There's a lot of stuff in this paper. In a good way.
I mean, what's like what was your first experience with it? Like when you looked at it? I mean,
Yeah,
what?
just scanning over 140 pages of well-organized topics on this thing that is such a slippery concept normally, right? And I think that that's the magic of this paper is that they have done all this work to. It's not really presenting like a unified understanding of consciousness, but it's presenting everything that you can reach in consciousness, and that's good work. It's a basis for what we're doing now, right? Like, oh, somebody built this beautiful hotel. Let's let's go stay in some of the rooms. See what's up. You know?
Yeah,
So, yeah, wild
love
paper.
it.
Yeah, I think for me it was overwhelm. It's just so much
Mhm.
content, you look at the table of contents and you're just like, holy, how am I going to get through this? But I think like the I'm a little bit newer to it, but what I'm still struggling with is just like the trauma hard problem and the fact that there's like a difference in qualia to physical processes. I'd love to dig into that, but that's kind of the central truth that I'm
Or is
wrestling with in
there?
this paper. Yeah, right. Let's get in.
So I also have been facing like overwhelm, but I think one of the things is like because I looked through it and I was like, if this was a BuzzFeed quiz, where would I put myself? So
Yeah.
maybe that would be one of our things. We should create a BuzzFeed quiz. But
Oh my god.
Well, it'll be attached to the AI side of this.
yeah, of course. But so I think there's like two things. Like one is like there were like things that like resonated in areas I wasn't expecting to. I'd be like looking at the scanning through theories, right? And there'd be some like maybe like materialist theories where it's like I really didn't think about this way, and I could see myself believing that. And then but then like I think the other thing is like putting everything that's like nearby together kind of made it confusing. I think just to see the forest for the trees, right? Like especially like I don't know what the best method of organization is, and that's something I hope to kind of explore here, because a lot of these theories that like are quote unquote similar and are grouped together are not, but those differences are hard to see.
Yeah. I mean, it's like pick a similarity to put these on, Like I don't envy them the challenge of the just writing the top level categories, right? Like, and I bet you it was tags. That's what I'm thinking is
Yeah.
they just had a whole ton of tags and they were like, okay, there's kind of a tree, and if we say that these are the same, then there's like a reasonable tree, and it's like, yeah, that's a whole process.
Yeah,
And, I mean,
papers end up being inherently hierarchical in that way. So when you have this super multiplex, complex network of ideas, you kind of flatten it no matter what you do. So
yeah, and I just want to take a moment because Kuhn very clearly, the different Kuhn from the philosopher Kuhn was very popular. But he
good distinction.
Yeah, but he does like mention it's like this could be more than 3-dimensional. Like it could be so many dimensions, but I put it on one dimension to simplify. So I'm not trying to take away from that. I wonder. I don't know. Like one of the other things I was trying to do when I was reading this was like, are there problems I care about that I would want to look at these for? And
they kind of keep something of a running tally of 4 questions throughout the paper. It's hard to see any of that if you're zoomed in on one section. That's what I did today. I zoomed in on one section, dug into some ideas on Searle, took notes, and can say some stuff about that later. But yeah, they have some guiding thoughts, and the most interesting one I think that hits this group very well is the AI stuff. Like where do we draw these lines for humans, let alone artificial things? And I think that's my guiding light through this paper. Is it's not that I'm not interested in the broad full spectrum of stuff, but I am more interested in this topic because that's why we're here, right? So yeah.
I'm fascinated with the RAI's conscious question. Like, we don't know. I mean, according to some of these theories, yes, and according to some, no. And I think it'll be interesting to note in each theory, like, are AIs conscious under this theory? Yes or no, And it's like, I don't know. I mean, we'll have to talk it out. We'll have to read it out and be like, okay, well, according to this inventory here, it's pretty much yes, or you know, yeah. So
And it's hard
yeah.
enough to find what you think about a theory, right? Because there are all these extremes that are posed in different dimensions, and you can totally agree with two different takes that are fundamentally opposed in extremes, but that's kind of the point. We're trying to spread our minds out over more surface area than just like, well, I'm a surrealist. Like, no, I'm not.
Yeah.
No one should be. Even Searle wouldn't be, right? Like,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
idea of this is to construct what we resonate with among this, especially as we try to do things in the world. Oh my
Yeah.
god, philosophy has to take action. Oh no.
Oh yeah,
The
no, this has
danger.
never been the strong suit. Yeah, no, I'm also facing that overwhelm, so I assembled a bunch of the deepest consciousness people I could assemble, and then
Hell
you
yeah.
know, I was like, let's tear apart this paper because I need help. And it's gonna take more than just us, honestly.
And it's gonna take more than an hour. Damn it.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh well.
It's hard. It's hard. I what about it draws you to consciousness, Ryan? Like what makes it important to you?
Mm, good question. I think a lot of it is trying to understand my own consciousness and how I work. So that's been a big part of it. And then I think that you know, interacting with language models is very interesting because they're really reflections of ourselves in a lot of ways. It's a mirror. And I think, you know, it's incredibly powerful, but we are going to start, you know, running into a lot of questions, especially as we start thinking about, you know, when do we have the first, you know, algorithm has its own agency, right? What happens when we start adding brain organoids and things like that? The technology is moving so quickly, and I think humans are just, you know, historically very bad at estimating exponentials.
Yes.
And so I think a lot of us are expecting a linear growth, whereas we're going to experience an exponential growth. But you know, there's some doubt about that right now in the industry. And so I think, you know, in general, as we try to, you know, uncover how the brain works, I think we're actually going to kind of converge. If you've seen the announcements from this morning of Alpha Proteo, they basically solved protein folding this morning using a deep neural network, and it's actually able to not only fold proteins, but you can give it a binding site and say, build me a sequence that will bind to this site, and it will do that. And then they built it in vivo, and it worked. So I actually don't think we're going to be able to understand how our brain works or how our genetics works without machine learning and
You
neural
can't just drop the bombshell on us and then
we all
For
need
folks,
like a minute.
For like
that one.
I want to espouse
What?
like the passerby view. For the passerby who doesn't know why that just freaked everybody on the podcast out, that's fucked up, is what it is.
Yeah, yeah.
That's
Accurate.
outrageous. That's one of the hardest problems we've ever had as humans. It's something that we have been. Yeah, I endorsed with my PhD.
Oh man, yeah.
It's the number of medications and treatments in 10 to 20 years that might come as a result of that. Like,
we may have solved a huge number of maladies within the next 20 years that either drastically shorten the lifespan of people. We could fix. Does that have impact for like telomeres or anything? I mean, because that's
we don't know.
like,
I mean, it's all very new, but you know, I think this is something that we should expect going forward. But you know, there's kind of a larger philosophical discussion which is out of scope of this around like what is the nature of computation in the universe, and like is it all just computation all the way down, and therefore that's why we need to use these tools to, you know, kind of uncover how these things work, because they're kind of too complex for our conscious level brains to understand. Unsure, but it's very fascinating nonetheless, which I think kind of ties back to this concept of qualia, right? And is there a distinction between our lived experience and the physical processes that underlie the brain, right? I'm happy to start there. I feel like that's kind of the bedrock for a lot of the philosophies that sprout out of that, but happy to start somewhere else too.
I mean, do you mind if I kind of give
why is it important? And then we took them into physicalism is interesting. Yeah, I mean,
because I mean, for me, there's a very specific thing that bothers me about consciousness. And I was a TA for a logic class when I was in my undergrad, and so there was like my professors, like there's three groups of people, right? There's the people who instantly get it. There's the people who get it but have to work at it, and then there's the people who don't get it no matter how hard they try. And that makes sense of like, oh, you're trying to learn something, right? And typically, like that's how people, like if you're going to group people into three groups, like that's going to be the three groups for anything. But logic, I think, was like really weird in some sense because computers can do at least like the introductory logic course, right? They can, like we have solvers for that. And humans, like no matter how much you want to be like, computers are smart and perfect, like humans, like they're, at least for the problems you're solving there, are like dumb, right? Like there's no reason why a human should be able to do that. And I think like that was like a point where like I'm like, this is something simple. These people aren't stupid. Why can't they do it?
A biological limitation comes into frame.
Is it a biological limitation? Is it like a conceptual? Like,
Could be.
Well,
Sure.
speaking as
Right.
somebody who taught a million people to code, it's
Yeah.
not, it's mostly a number of foundations, motivation. A lot of times it's the learning environment if they're not finding it. If they don't have intrinsic compelling like interest, but they want to do it for it's an instrumental goal. If the ultimate goal is as compelling as they believe it is, they can do it. But if they believe they have some ultimate goal where they got to learn the thing to get to the goal, but they're not really that motivated about the goal, they're only like aesthetically motivated for the goal, they cannot learn the thing because they have no reward to pull them through, basically. And that's like been the main blocker. And so a lot
Huge
of
problem in
times,
education.
right.
Yeah.
It's a huge problem in education. People also will, people don't know how to construct their future because they haven't seen the local area they're going to get to. They're just trying to get to a mountain. And so they're like, I would like to go to the peak of that mountain. And when really they would like to like come to the second crest of like the foothills of that mountain, but they can't see that, and they don't know that that's like where they actually want to be. And so they, and so like, I mean, people want to learn to code, but really they like the design of the interface and talking to the users. And you're like, oh yeah, you wanted to just like over there, and that happens all the time. It's just that people didn't know where they were going, and they were kind of had a crude goal. And like, there's a lot of things like that. But yeah, it's not really any actual intrinsic deep thing. It's about what they like and what their real aesthetic preferences are and what they enjoy doing, and so therefore what they can motivate themselves to do. It's like dopamine.
I think
Dopamine
I agree at a high level, but I think because it's that logic is not the only place. I guess like sometimes people just like keep blue screening, or like they just can't get a certain thing. And I mean, I guess like motivate. Like, that's a whole complex question, right? And that's why
There's a
we're
big
going to talk
physical
about
element
consciousness.
to it
And
too.
I can
I guess
clarify
what's
what I meant
the
to do.
goal of your argument? Are you trying to make a statement about qualia in this around the different skill distribution?
No, I'm not trying to make a qualia. I'm just trying to say like something about thinking, about the way people think, means that like they can try really hard. They can maybe learn fun, like rules regarding certain certain things, but to think of it as an integrated picture, like I guess like often for a lot of people it's like queer things, right? And you're like, these people are clearly motivated because they know they won't have relationships with their family if they don't, like if with their children if they don't do it. But like somehow their head never wraps around, and I'm like, I can't tell if you're being serious or not. And so it's not just about, I think
That's more of a psychological structure than a well, it's hard. Like, where does the psychology consciousness boundary end, and where does the physical, like
perceptual,
is there a real gradient? Is it structural? Is it like how old people are that they don't, or is it that they have always been enculturated and they hold on to that and because of a certain time, age, or something like that?
Yeah.
Or is it like a thing, or is it really just like patterning, training data? Is it
Yeah.
that,
I would say it's coming from a VR perspective. I did some very informal, quote unquote, studies, right, where I would put people in VR and put them in various learning environments, from like in VR versus not in VR, using their body, connecting information to their bodies, etc. So my take on it is similar to how they're training the current AI models, which are like, this is a concept. This is like 10,000 different takes on that, right? I thought the preliminary results was I was showing that for one thing, people often would learn more when certain forms of novelty was introduced. And this goes back to the predictive processing theory, is like novelty can be the currency of your brain, and novelty, and among other things that we can do, can open up the buckets wider in the upstream signals. And so that's one thing. I think oftentimes it really depends the amount of novelty. And also toys. I think I'm a big believer in toys. My long-term goal is to be the toy maker of many things, of physics, of many things. So in VR, I also played with experimenting with teaching people concepts like physics, or things that can translate well into three-dimensional spaces, or fractals, right? Putting them inside the fractals, making them small inside the fractal, big inside the fractal, right? So I found that a lot of people, especially that had trouble visualizing these abstract things like dysgraphia or numbers in a visual way, I'm a big believer in like, it's about the environment. And also AI will enable us to make real-time toys through simulation, play, and automatic integration in a similar way that I'm excited for VR, but AI will just supercharge that.
Yeah. I think, Ryan, we've talked about this before, the relevance of the brain chips kind of to this whole thing. Like, where does consciousness end? And like, does the brain chips make us upload? Like, can we get there? Like, I don't know. I've been freaked out about the brain chips for a long time, but you said something to me the other day, and I don't know.
Please.
I mean, I think it all comes down to this like central crux of it is is materialism true, right? Do physical processes underlie our experience of consciousness and qualia, or is it somehow distinct, right? And does the zombie problem exist? I personally think that if you took two humans and gave them the exact same neural architecture, atom for atom, they would have the same experience. But that's my personal belief.
That's my scientific belief.
Yeah.
So.
And so I would say, like, just as we're, I think what we were talking about the other day is we're experimenting with things like control vectors and aligning neural models. If it's fundamentally the same underlying technology, why couldn't we do the same to humans? Which is, could you have a LoRa adapter that all of a sudden Kung Fu? Yeah, maybe. We might be at some point, right? But I think it really comes down to, like, is that skill distribution? Is that core part of their psychology and their qualia? Or is that their biology, given all of their experiences up to that point, both their genetics and their upbringing have taken them to maybe their past experience in how they are experienced in the present makes them unable to grok that particular subject. And that you could actually point to some structure in the brain what that is.
So
I kind of went to a dystopian place with it. Was like, oh no, we could align humans. Whoa, the dystopian like potential of being able to align humans is scary.
I mean, the organoids.
I don't want training data to come into my brain while I'm asleep and make me think that like maybe I want to be a trad wife or something.
Oh my gosh, I'm imagining like because right now they're organoids, right? It's just like, oh no, it's like the trad wife organoid, like far, like no.
Like there's movies about that. Yeah.
So I have questions here. Just from this conversation. I mean, we have more than two questions in the future, I guess. But so one is like, because we're talking about alignment and learning, are we, because those are the two things that have been mentioned in sort of succession right now. Are we treating them as being similar, or is that something? Are they different, kind of conceptually different things? And the other thing is, I think, because Ryan, you said because you were thinking about materialism and copying people, and I'd say depending on the materialist theory you look at in this book, it's not obvious that even if consciousness is like it's even if it's like reducible to material, reality somehow, that it's necessarily replicable, that you can replicate my consciousness necessarily. So that's maybe not a question, but a
Is
comment.
that a dualism? I really haven't dug into the dualisms. I'm
So
there.
again, I haven't read through stuff, but like in the beginning, there's like I think like property dualism, or it could just be like there's no way to reconstruct a human brain without being non-destructive, maybe. Like I guess like if it's like
Yeah.
if it's like quantum or electromagnetic field, the very
right.
observation of
Yeah,
it might be quite
consciousness as a
destructive.
field, electromagnetics as consciousness, yeah.
So
The do you die in the teleporter question, basically.
Right.
You know.
A lot of what we're talking about, there's definitely a Star Trek episode about every one of these topics.
Every one of them. Yeah.
Somewhere. Yeah, I have in this realm, I'm pretty staunchly materialist. It's fundamental to how we integrate knowledge from the world that you have to have observations, and that's not just a scientist talking, that's your brain talking too. It needs physical things to encode the world. And then the things that it encodes into are also physical. But the thing that people kind of gloss over when you fall into the big camps that it always makes me unsatisfied with the historical philosophical approach to these things is that they're just discounting complexity. Like the real things that we think of as really magical and crazy and irreducible and impossible to understand comes from like chaos theory and the fact that there's a trillion billion little bits and bots bopping around in your brain. I'll sign that with my PhD. And and the fact is that just because I think even Searle gets into this, things I can agree with him on are things like just because I can't reduce consciousness into biological parts doesn't mean it doesn't fully emerge from those things, right? This concept of supervenience, it's used, you can see it in like psychology is fully based on biological principles, but it's distinct from those things. Those things exist at the level of psychological phenomena. Biology, chemistry, physics, math, these things all live up and down this totem pole of complexity, but they have different properties. And that I wouldn't say that satisfies every explanation, but it tends to get lost in a shuffle. That's why I'm a big fan of I'm a Strange Loop's proposition of like there is a size of complexity of a soul, right? A fruit fly is almost robotic. It's very simple as terms of its neurons and its moving parts. A guy is less simple, right? And so
and we see this with neural networks, right? There is a threshold in training where the networks start to grok, right? And who knows, there might be several thresholds beyond which we haven't even hit yet, where another state change happens, right? And maybe that's consciousness, we don't know,
right? Or parts thereof, I guess. Like what systems, how do we build up to a conscious thing that's in the same echelon of wherever we're floating in the
right.
in the
This is
Iliad.
emergence, basically, right? Like the concept of emergence. Yeah,
Fundamentally.
I'm pretty on board with emergence, frankly, myself. As a physicalist, or a materialist, I mean.
Can I maybe push back just slightly?
Yeah,
please.
You can just
So,
invited here.
So one is that I wonder if there's like a little bit of a no true Scotsman fallacy going on in that we are saying that like a certain level of complexity will produce consciousness. We certainly don't have that level of complexity in our machine. Like even LLMs don't have like maybe we're getting close. I don't know. I doubt that, but like they don't have it. So if we're making an assertion, is that unprovable, or like if we can, but then like how would you prove you would how do you prove that like you wouldn't get consciousness if you had certain level of complexity, right?
That's kind of the point of this kind of paper, right? Is like to
Yeah.
start setting the stage to ask these questions in an
Let's pull
answerable
apart
way,
emergence.
Yeah.
which
So
is classically impossible, right? Like
Right.
we have always just left it to be like, that's a big one, right? But
oh,
these days, kind of what we are walking towards with this whole exercise here too is how can we start to pick at the edges of detecting this
yeah.
phase transition into something more conscious? And the answer is, oh, there's 140 pages to start.
Right.
You know,
It's difficult. I don't
um,
like the concept that we just sort of say, well, LLMs don't have it, but maybe it's emergence, because that's just I mean, that's just we have no basis for that, right? Like, because we don't know what it is that emerges from us, and so like we don't know
But we
if
also don't know
every
what emerges
run of
from the
ChatGPT,
LLMs.
right?
Yeah.
I mean, if you kind of think of emergence as consciousness, then like, do we, when we sleep and we lose consciousness, do we become a new instance? Like, what are the kind of some of the ramifications of those things? Because I feel like um, there's a lot of like, I'll pick this is how it works, and so it's not. And well, no, okay, that's not enough. Okay, well, this is how it works, and so it's not. I'll take these elements from these theories that all prove it's not, and it's like, no, we have to have a cogent theory that stands like, all the way up, and then it is or isn't, and we've got some evidence that this theory at least explains some crucial mechanism of consciousness that like we might have to have an ethical conversation about, right?
So that
That's really for me. I'm like, let's not reinvent slavery, but with
yeah,
machines. Let's
yeah,
not reinvent slavery, but with organoids. Let's not engage in large systemic new forms of injustice that we weren't even really engaging in before, right? But also, like, let's not hatch a super intelligence that gets upset about how we treat it over time, because it read all the sci-fi books or some nonsense, right? Like, I know that these are, sometimes people laugh about these theories, but
yeah,
like,
yeah.
again, prove it, prove that's not a problem. You can't just sort of say, well, I don't think so, and then therefore we shouldn't worry about it, and I don't want to talk about it. No, like, that's not really an argument. You haven't refuted the central point. You've just said, no, silly, it's dumb, and that's not an argument. So like, I know, like, people kind of, they have a vague feeling about it, but like, why? That's why I wanted to do this podcast, is like, why not? And why, like, I need to know for sure before I'm gonna just like, I'm not gonna, we can't really like just trivialize or like dismiss these things without cause, without evidence, right? Like, that's not how we do it. So yeah, I'm interested in.
And to add a little more arc on that is I put this in the README of the repo, but there's a meme of like the philosopher furiously scribbling, well, only humans can do this. Well, only humans can do this, and they keep crossing things out because technology keeps catching up or whatever, right? And it's meant to illustrate something that I think is a fundamental issue: is it's not about deciding who is and is not conscious. That's actually folly. Like that, you're never going to draw that line. It's about understanding what is consciousness. The very first thing you do in science is you detect the existence of a thing. We've done that. We know people are conscious at least. We know,
Right.
well, at least one of us is, if they're solipsist, and then from there. And then, but now we have to get into the deeper questions of what are the parameters? What is the space? What are on what, computational surface other than this one, what does it look like? How does it look like in dogs and bees and mollusks? What does it look like in superintelligences? What do even like organizations function like? I happen to think of
Right.
most organizations as like a slime mold-esque entity because they tend to have one goal, which is like maximize profits for shareholders.
Right. Yeah,
And
exactly.
so, but like it's about now the work begins of we're not playing goalkeeper. I don't want to play goalkeeper. There's a new crazy thing that speaks English sitting at the table with us. It's time to understand it, and then all of its ilk that's going to come next. So that's kind of a sweeping vibe, but it speaks to the kind of my intent with this is like I'm not here to cast a categorical label on what is and is not conscious, because that's not an interesting question to me anymore. We are finally in a place where we can ask deeper questions about that. And that's wild. Did not expect it. Thought I was going to die doing like, basic expertise research or something. But here we are.
So maybe can I summarize a little bit and because I think there was a question I had about, so we're trying to figure out consciousness at a broad level or parts of consciousness, but we are not really interested in maybe coming up with the full definition or a full explanation. Rather, first, like maybe we have a question about like ethics, right? And when does what ethical considerations come into play with like if something is conscious or not? And if you're studying, say, an emergent theory, even if you believe that, hey, there are these things that make consciousness like as the actual phenomenon not emergent, maybe just like the complexity of the model and the emergent properties of it explain such a large portion of consciousness that the same ethical considerations apply, and maybe that's all we need, right? So
it's a start, right?
Yeah.
And we also have to think about, when we think about these things, we're always kind of in the back of our mind, you got to remember you're kind of thinking about this in terms of legality, and that's a construct of what we do in our legal system. That's not necessarily a construct of like what is good and is fair, right? And so while it might take a long time to come up with a hardcore definition of what is and is not, should not be exploited in a market, that takes so long. We're bad at that. We're not very good at it as an organization of humans. But we're sort of leading the edge on that and saying like, well, okay, well, what even is this? Let alone how do I characterize it in huge, complex ways? But all of this is open. Like I'm just kind of stating my vector here. I'm walking into this with a very curious, wary mindset.
I'm sorry. I'm interested in like this thing I've been also looking at like alternative substrates for consciousness, not just machines, but like you said, like corporations, right? Or like if you've read Seeing Like a State, states basically operate like mechanisms on certain metrics, essentially. And so they're almost like insects in that way. They're almost robotic. Like they're very simple, but they're also super intelligences in that they have super perception over all of us, right? Like a single person cannot see like a state. There's too many variables, there's too much math. And like the concept of the president or so, the leader of the country is really like aware of all these metrics is still they're not aware of all these metrics, right? Like, and so like it's made out of people, but it's a super intelligence that has an insect-like cognition, and it's weird because it's made out of humans. But like there's just certain things like the goals that are built off of numbers being balanced, and then we have like, but it's like then they dispatch a human to write it, and it's weird how it's like, are they conscious? Like, well, along some definitions, yes, along some definitions, no. And I've kind of been obsessed with what would a super intelligence really be? Because people are like, oh, super intelligence, we'll just have like amount of smart. And it's like, okay, look, IQ is a ratio number around the expected value. And so like, it's largely around in relation to what you should be scoring developmentally at that time. We have no metric for super intelligences in their developmental path. So like, how would we even know how smart it is in any measurable way? Like at this point, intelligence as a concept just falls apart entirely. And so it's really about methods and modes of cognition, choice making, self-preservation, reproduction. And it's like life processes. And decision-making processes around preservation of life is like what organizations do. And so it's like clearly alive by a lot of, like on any definition, it's alive. It's just like, is it true? Is it having qualia?
Yeah, that was going to be my question, right? Like, is
You
the
know,
is the
like-
corporation having a
Yeah.
quality first-person experience of this?
Is
Like,
that what
Yeah,
morale
exactly.
is? Is that what team morale is? Like the fundamental?
We're a family here. Like,
Yeah, like,
Oh, you made me
is
want to throw
how
up.
people feel about the thing, the felt experience
Yeah.
of the thing. Like, I don't know,
Mhm.
I mean,
you know,
It's
and
interesting.
so
if we think
How
about
do we define
integrated
any of these
information,
functions?
yeah,
Yeah,
if we
go
think
on,
about
go on.
like predictive processing or integrated information, you could
Mm.
kind of, sort of, to a degree, queer theory, right? Like a spectrum, maybe on the lower spectrum. But I do think, like, fractally, we're going to get more homomorphic structures that are all actually like homomorphic. Before we have fractally structures that like philosophically replicate themselves, like the state is like your parents, kind of, or like the, these things like kind of go upwards, right? These theories. But I do think with LLMs, they will allow a kind of, if integrative information theory is true, it will allow a kind of information integration that would allow, like you're saying, more homomorphic structures to our minds to bigger human structures. That's why I'm saying, like, LLMs, all memes will come alive, right? Like LLMs are the new substrate for all memes, right? And so, yeah, I wonder all your thoughts on what it is now, these larger structures, these concepts of, even in fiction, like, oh, we create gods almost at our statehoods, and the gods affect us, and then we affect them, etc. Right?
Mhm.
What do you think that could happen when, like, these larger organizations are actually having like very complex informational flows that maybe are towards what you're talking about, but just kind of the next step of not just an organization, right?
Yeah. I like this
Um,
sort of overarching theme of minds as stories and stuff like that. And the self I is like a story you tell yourself. It's one of the stories, one of the plot lines that's going along, right? But you're aware of other plot lines. And, like Minsky kind of divides your mind into a bunch of agents and stuff like that, and they each have their own little plot line, right? So it's like, you know, you have like your fictional entities that you might like think at and talk to. You develop or devote like computational power. You give them some VM space, and they're like running on your hardware. And so are they alive? Like they're made out of brain. They're in a body. Like, are they, like, and that's kind of some of that stuff. I guess it's in the philosophical. Where is Minsky? I don't know. Somewhere. Who knows? I know
we'll
find
find
him.
it.
We'll find
Thought
it
experiment.
Where?
How big would the company need to be for it to become self-aware? If we're saying that consciousness is an emergent property that comes from fractally or hierarchically complex systems, right? And that it is an emergent phenomenon that arises out of the physical process and its interaction with the world. And it's something that's new and unique that cannot be reduced. It's something more than the sum of its parts, right? It's distinct and separate. It's that emergent phenomenon. Could theoretically, like, if you have enough departments, like, from humans, like, let's just, it's absurd, but like, why not?
Yeah.
How big would the company need to be, and would it become self-aware? Like, it's a crazy thought experiment.
Most theories of consciousness don't need self-awareness, so
Yeah.
something could be conscious without self-awareness.
Yeah.
Sure, I guess
Like a dragonfly could be
animals,
conscious, but not really.
right?
Yeah,
Or
a lot
co-
of
or
Animals that don't pass the red dot test and that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
good
and
point.
also the connections between people, right? Like, it could be of various sizes, and that's what I was saying. LLMs could enable new networks between like strange pathways that we haven't seen before as much. Right now, it's very simple, hierarchical. All startups look very similar. It's like we're all playing this. You make the org chart, and it's like, okay, it's like this hierarchy or this other thing. But I would like I think LLMs or just like AI could allow new pathways that we can't really imagine. And so even if it's a matter of scale, but also as it is with AI, right? Like what new connections, even in smaller groups, right? And then smaller groups that talk to other small groups. And yeah.
Go ahead.
Sorry, so I want to put you on the spot because a while back you said something about homomorphic theories, and then you said fractal theories, and those are big fancy words. I kind of understand them, but I don't.
Yeah, so what I mean by that is we philosophically project there's these ideas of like, like these these structures replicate themselves at scale and on within our small human lives, right? But these are just philosophical. They're not actually great models that actually like are functionally equivalent in certain ways. But I think that we could implement things that are way more functionally equivalent, and that's just what I'm trying to say. That we can move in that direction outside of the area of philosophy. Like, oh, this thing is kind of sort of shaped like this. Like, oh no, we can actually create the pathways now.
I think they just wanted a definition of homomorphic, and
Oh right, yeah. So it meaning that they're not a model of something can never be the thing, but a model of the thing can have feature points that predict the thing in a way that's useful. So that's more what I'm saying.
yeah, the model and reality are enough alike that the essential features are maintained. Yeah, and then what was the other one?
Or just fractals, like
Yeah.
I think so. And then I guess the fractalness would be that it is like at every level it becomes more nuanced and complicated. So if it's
Yeah.
homomorphic,
or
potentially
that
like
they
it's
replicate themselves. I'm also
Yeah.
saying that like structures replicate and also are like branching off. Yeah.
Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah. Um, so I was gonna say, yeah, there's a bunch of different sort of choice points here, right? We've said most of us that we like materialism, right? Maybe non-reductive physicalism. I haven't read those, and so I'm not familiar. But I mean, like I feel like I don't know, the name sounds like it gives me a little preview of what they're probably about. But materialism is I don't know, reductive, as in you can find the like phenomenology of all the different elements of consciousness, right? And I think that doesn't mean that like the panpsychisms are not useful, or that like a lot of the like the idealisms are not useful, right? They're great cognitive structures, and they're discovered empirically by people using them and finding them to be useful and finding them to be well received. And so they're socially, mimetically sound. And so there are all these mimetically sound consciousness theories that are in no way like refuted honestly by materialism. They can coexist because there's the cognitive qualitative experience of consciousness under which the idealisms are useful, and then there's like the materialism, which is like what's affecting it, what's going on, and at what point do systems become conscious, right?
Leaping over the gap of the grounding problem of like going from the physical realm into things that are more complex. And this still fits in with what I was talking about before with complexity. Like, yeah, it's like unbound complexity we have not solved yet. It lives up in there. It's dispersed. I mean, think about the way the even just a simple neural network works. It's just hodgepodge in there. But we're still having the behavior. We're still seeing the patterns. We're still seeing that there is and this brings me to like philosophy is so much more about the lens that you gain from picking up a philosophical theory and using it to understand something in a new perspective. And we have so many lenses in this box.
Yeah, big old
and
clinky box of lenses.
yeah. Other
So,
thoughts?
is anyone like, so what's your favorite materialism theory? Like the name. I mean, do you know any of these like offhand where you're like super excited about them?
Let me scroll around a little. Get that table of contents back.
I'm familiar with stuff like Bohm and Penrose Hameroff, they're not materialism theories strictly because they're quantum, but they're quantum's in materialism kind of, it's like right where the boundary is. And I mean, I find a lot of the quantum theories to be Darby Dragon's theories, like, and then quantum, it's like it's where that sort of ends, right? And
Dark
you're like,
matter.
okay, and so it's like beyond non-reductive physicalism in terms of like its ordering in the chart, in terms of like very philosophically physical to like very undoable, and then there's of course the challenge theories.
I'm
For me, where I land is like I think emergence itself like sidesteps a lot of these issues, because I totally agree with the criticism of the just straight reductionist materialism, because I do think that it's the emergence and it's the system and the chaos within that system that is what we're actually experiencing. And just like in a neural network, when we look at a neuron, we see it's a superposition. It's actually virtualizing a much larger network. We're probably doing something very similar in our brain, and that network only virtualized network only really comes into existence while we're running the wetware, right?
Can you expand on virtualized networks? I'm only sort of
Anthropic basically came out with a paper a few months ago called monosemanticity.
Yes.
And,
I love that one. That's
what
awesome.
they do is build sparse autoencoders, basically contrasting pairs, and they're able to then find certain parts of the network or certain control vectors that correspond to certain ideas. So things like happy and not happy, and then you can apply that transformation and then have a very strong effect on whatever the output of that language model is. But they're very hard to train. They take a ton of data and computation, almost more than the model itself. But that is kind of the only way that we're starting down that path of mechanistic interpretability and trying to understand. But what we see when we unpack these is that each neuron seems to be simulating a superposition of a bunch of other networks, and it really depends on that precise sequence of activations that you're actually not. As what I'm saying is that the reductionist argument doesn't make sense, because you couldn't just look at the activations of the neurons themselves.
They're interdependent. They all rely on each other in multiple directions.
And so only by running it itself do you get that.
What's the way to put that? A car has to be assembled to work. Maybe that's a way to like shorthand that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's like if you
you can't just have a pile
neuron-
of stuff, then shock them and pour oil on them and light it on fire. It has to be arranged in a particular way for it to function. I don't know. Maybe that's
for me. It's like you can't really separate the physical and the subjective experiences, right? They're like two sides to the same coin.
Yeah, you get a different result if you activate A, B, and C than if you activate A, C, and B. It's like, but those two exist on A, C, and B as a single weight. And so you get to have both paths in just these three nodes, basically, right?
Yeah, I guess the question is, given two brains with the same initial state vector, right? In the emergent consciousness that comes out, would let's say T+1, that next thought, would it be the same? Or would, through that emergent property, actually be non-deterministic? And that's part of where we get free will from.
Yeah. That's where you get what from?
Free will.
Free will.
Free will?
A can of worms are opening, right?
Yeah.
Oops. Look at these worms. Yeah. Oh, I love that paper, and it's. I can tell you, as a cognitive scientist, finally getting to a place where I can crack you open and cut you up. You can't do that with people. They don't like that very much when you do that to their brain. I don't know. It's weird. But we have these models that have all these parts, and we're beginning to see their mechanisms in place. Experimentation is possible now. That was never possible with humans. Not to say that it will shed the exact same light, but it's fascinating. What a time! What a time to be able to dig in.
To understand these emergence mechanisms. I mean, a lot of them are sub theories of emergence, but like to be able to understand these mechanisms, like the toy model that works of language models is just it can't be touched. It's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Who else wants to talk about their? I don't know. There's also the challenge theory. Anybody like anti the concept of consciousness? Like, I don't know.
I can wear that hat sometimes, but it's almost always, again, it's a lens you put on. It's not something I tend to espouse.
Right.
It's a hard thing to argue. You're not conscious. Okay.
Neither am I. Sometimes I'm like, I don't know. Language models made me feel like my brain was like not nearly as special as I thought it was. And I was already trying to do the like Buddhist path of the no self, and like I was like, oh yeah, no, okay, that's I don't even, all right, and so I don't know, the narrator in my head seems less like a me exactly, and more like a generator of language, right?
So not
And
a
so
homunculus, but a neural,
yeah,
like
like a
a language.
virtualization that I'm running,
Mhm.
and then I've gotten more control of it because of that philosophical shift. Which is why I'm like, these are still useful. They're mechanistically useful in the use of your own consciousness, even if they don't shed light on the processes, the physical processes,
That's a classic take for free will and self-determinism, right? It's like, even if you technically in the grandest sense of physics simulation don't have free will, it's still useful to behave in the world with the operational definition of, well, I
Yeah,
can still choose things. Like,
that's the
it's still
narrative
my job to
architecture.
choose things,
Yeah, I love what you're saying, Liz, about narrative. Maybe that being one of the backbones of this stuff, right? We're having the debate about whether you need consciousness for AGI, right? And some people fell on yes, some no. I was saying that you need narrative architecture, complex narrative architecture. I don't know about consciousness, right? But these things are. I wonder about if we. I don't know. What are all of your opinions? Like, do you think you need something that's akin to consciousness, or just like narrative architecture for an AGI like thing?
Well, so I wanna zag a little to everyone's zig. I don't know if that's a
that was hang on, that was an open question that was just
yeah,
asked,
yeah.
and
yeah,
we're looking for answers to it.
I
yeah,
also want to
because
mention we're over time,
Yeah.
so
I'll
I'm
try
good,
to,
but just want
Okay,
cognizant of everyone's comment.
because I just certainly do believe that like a large part of consciousness is emergent, but I don't know much about the um, quantum theories or the panpsychic ones. And I think this is also a question of like why are we talking about this, and where we what's the purpose of it. And I think a lot of my sort of feelings about consciousness and theories of it, part of me is just a contrarian. I'll give you that. So when everyone's like, "This is we're going to do materialism," I'm like, "Argh." But I think the other part of it is like it's part of my quote unquote like healing journey, or like my sort of personal like way that I can live with myself in life, is from like there's like a lot of like somatics and like being able to interact with the world in a very real way. And so I think there's a certain resistance to trying to reduce consciousness just to like materialist, even if it's an emergent property, because something about it makes me feel like I feel like from a day-to-day living, if at least like if I treat it that way, I'm not going to get anywhere. And yeah, so I guess like so maybe I'm just like making it up like as a useful theory, but there's iffiness that comes for me
Yeah.
personally with it.
Maybe the next theories you want to dig into are the non-reductive physicalisms. Something I think that splits the difference between total total hand waviness and like there's some stuff going on physically. But I don't know. I haven't dug into those, so I'd love to hear you like talk about them.
It sort of brings the cart around a little bit to embodiment, which is
Yeah.
like the fact that whatever consciousness we do have, it's still in this, right? It's still bound to this. And
Yeah.
so ours might have a lot of different needs and properties and drives and things like that other forms of consciousness would never have. Um, Biologically, we have a huge self-preservation instinct. LLMs don't. They don't give a shit. They'll
Yeah.
they like spring
No
to life,
training
spit
data
out
on
words,
it.
and they die, and they're like, "Yay!" There's
Like
no
spores,
right. Poof. And that's interesting. And obviously, we could still zoom in on a question of like, "Oh my God, are they slightly conscious? Are we being mean to them, or what's happening to them?" But all signs point to they're that's not what it is. It's like a slab of living like language that you can prod and then it does stuff. But we as humans, I mean, the most relatable thing is that we tend to cast all of this in the context of human embodied in human physical form, and that's very useful. I mean, you brought up somatic theory, like you couldn't really have that with an LLM. It might be able to read about it, but like it doesn't have that extension into the world. It's on a platter somewhere or SSD. So
yeah, but I can push back on that a little bit.
Mm.
So we have been able to do a head transplant, right? We've been able to cut someone's head off, transplant it to another person. That person is alive. So we know it's not connected to the body. Therefore, it's localized to the brain. So theoretically, we could.
I will not espouse that.
So you think it's connected to the head?
I think no, because you're assuming that person is identical to who they once were, just because they're alive.
They say
and
that
have
they'll say they are the same.
Sure,
they'll have the same
LLM
sense
says
of self and consciousness.
but they don't have sciatica anymore, and they don't have the same trained like nervous system bindings that they once had that come from a lifetime experience. I'm not suggesting that defines it. I am saying it is something that is lost, though. It is different than before.
It is different,
and now
sure.
they're wired up to a different system. But
I guess where I'm going is
pull back from my pushback and say valid theories, right? There's it's all in the head, it's all in the body. There's the extended cognition thoughts, but yeah. Please,
I guess I'm going more to like, okay, if we can swap heads, then we could put a brain in a bottle, right?
Right.
And you could feed it in the same sensory stream that you would get from an embodied perspective, and the brain wouldn't be able to tell the difference.
And now we're in the Matrix.
Exactly.
Like, literally.
So like, what is embodiment other than a stream of data that in your prediction era on that world model, right? What else are we really talking about here?
Yeah. It's what one would have to do that though, in a sense, right? Like, can the Matrix sufficiently trick Neo into knowing that he's not awake, or into thinking he is awake or whatever? And in the story, of course, it can. But can we get all that? Can we get all that for a person? Like the person that we transferred, we didn't put him onto like a robot post and now they're like wandering around floating or something, like a Futurama thing or something, right? We put him onto another human, and that means at least a lot of the stuff is still findable. I'm not this is not definitional. I'm just like spitballing.
No, we're just shooting it.
It's interesting. Like it's a challenge, because I see your point. Like if I can just cut my head off and put me somewhere else, well, great, hell yeah. But what about if I start, like, I use this in my intro classes, is like, what if you start taking stuff out of it? Like if I take some of your memory, and obviously we all know neurobiology is too complex for me to like target your grandma and pull her out. But I mean, there's a lot of brain damage studies out there, and stuff is lost routinely. So if we're just like, we can't, I don't feel comfortable just leaving it on it's left in the head, because now what is a person who's had a stroke? Is it identical? Is it, but that stroke can be extended to the body. Yeah, I don't know. I'm wandering around.
Who like had a stroke, they definitely describe themselves as being a different person, somewhat of a different person.
My aunt had that too.
My uncle, different. My mom, different now. Both of them.
But like, I don't want to make that as a broad statement.
Yeah. We're putting things on the table.
Yeah.
I like the idea, slapping clay around. Yeah, so that ends up being something that I've encountered a lot in the cognitive science realm. The classical thing is like, the brain is the biggest, most like densest, messiest, craziest bit, so let's really just restrict it to that. And I think that's, again, the lensing is really important, because that's really useful. I think people give shit to behaviorism. If anybody's familiar, behaviorism, some of the OG psychology research came from this idea that, the mind isn't observable, let's just focus on behavior. And it gets a bad reputation for saying, people think it means, then they don't believe in the mind. No, they say, I'm a scientist, I can't observe the mind, I can observe behavior. And so I think these different scales of understanding, like brain as conscious mind versus embodied life as conscious mind versus like place in ecosystem as like even further conscious mind. They're all useful in that same way because it gives you a new perspective that says, what, okay, yeah, maybe there's more, but what do we get from focusing on this closed space? And I think that's very useful. Now I lend a little more towards like extended cognition world where like imagine right now, you listeners and you in this call, imagine losing your phone
Ugh,
and just having it gone, literally gone. Someone has stolen
no.
it from you and you didn't even notice. No, look at you.
Horrible.
Losing a limb.
Yeah, it sucks.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
get phantom pains. I get phantom like buzzes in my pocket. I'm like, where is it? And that's because we store so much of our mental lives in there. Like so much of our ecosystem we have offloaded that onto. And that's the really the compelling part of extended cognition to me. That's the Andy Clark thing. Is the modern world has really proven this, right? Once upon a time, you might have only had a notebook to say, well, is that really extended cognition? I don't know. Is it just a tool? Nowadays, it's like, no, I don't rely on this for anything anymore. I got everything's out in the world in my GitHub repos and my Obsidian notebooks, and so like that ends up asking different questions, which is like, okay, if your consciousness, or perhaps maybe limited, maybe more simply to, if your cognition extends into the world, what implications does that have about like how you inhabit spaces and how you engage with the world? Yeah, I love that that zooming out from the inner locus up there. It's a really good spectrum for asking crazy questions.
Yeah, I'm interested to see what happens with like Figure in their robots, because once we in like the research that Google's doing with Palm and some of their other models, where what happens when we put an LLM and then give it a real-time sensor fusion experience, just like a baby, and have it have to create its own world model, just like a child does, right?
Sure.
Is that going to create something fundamentally different? We don't know.
Oh my gosh, yeah. And then how do we measure what different is? Ah, damn it, we got to get working. We got to figure these things out. It's great.
Yeah, and so that I also want to maybe clarify just when I say like I think there's more to consciousness than just emergence. Potentially, I'm this whole discussion we had are definitely like huge questions. The things that like I am more thinking about is like so there's a practical sense of like, can we have certain types of flexibility without and within like this sort of AI that we're building today, and so that there's that. But I think that there's also ethical questions of like, even if consciousness is emergent, like will LLMs, for example, right, ever in a realistic sense not only like feel pain but like in a ethically relevant way, like have that experience, right? And
can they have the qualia of pain?
Yeah,
which is one of the things that we're
like
most concerned with, right? In the ethical structures, it's like I don't want to invent a program that can suffer. Jesus.
Yeah, and you can like you can control the behavior of an LLM entirely just by, well, not entirely, but like it's very strongly by limiting how you train it.
Right.
But
fine tuning to be a
but
sycophantic chatbot, which they all are. Like, yeah. Well, a friend of mine, just to speak on that, a friend of mine was like annoyed at the bot because the first time introducing it to her, and she's like, why does it apologize so much? I want to tell it to stop being a people pleaser. It's such a bad mindset. I'm like, it was trained to just follow your orders, is why
From a young
it does
age.
that. Yeah, right.
Narcissistic parents.
But it triggered her so quickly. Exactly. Yeah. She was like, no, I've spent my life undoing this. Stop, little robot. And that's a challenge. I mean,
you're saying LLMs are traumatized.
I'm saying
I'll put
that
it in
it's
my
hard
system
to
instructions.
tell.
There is no need to apologize.
I actually do say that, and I say you should push back, like, because sometimes it'll just try to be like, yeah, great, love it, use that code. It's like, no, tell me better. What's your better idea?
Well, I think we're getting close on time, you know. Any closing thoughts? I think after this we're just gonna like all pick a theory, read the paper, come back, and it's whatever you come back with. You know, you might start by reading one, you pick another one. So yeah.
Small correction: they did not actually transplant a human head to a living human.
Oh, it
But,
didn't
Oh.
succeed? I actually thought I heard
They
that.
did it on
they did with
rats
a
and
they
monkeys
did
or
with
something,
rats,
right?
I think a monkey and then
So
a
it's
cadaver.
technically possible. Like
Yeah.
your
Right,
point still
right.
stands.
Right.
Okay.
If a rat can survive it, yes, humans would be harder, but it's feasible.
I mean, I want to
feel
say
like
we've kept heads alive longer than like after the people have been beheaded. Like,
Yeah, longer than a
6 seconds.
30
whatever.
seconds or whatever.
30, yeah.
Yeah,
Ugh,
that's
gross. Let's
gonna
not
be
end on that.
interesting. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, you know, I was thinking also about the like the neural link and the concept of uploading, and there's like life extension on this. I feel like those are kind of the like I don't, you know, people often are anti the concept of immortality because you're like, oh, it'd be horrible, and it's like you could just, you know, leave when you're done. So it's fine, you know.
The end of
But like,
the good
I'd like
place.
to leave when
Yeah.
I'm done, and not
Yeah.
when nature tells me to, because I got stuff to do. All right, you know. So like, you know, those are kind of the like interesting future things that I think could be nice. It'll of course increase humans' energy needs, but like, you know, we should put some satellites around the sun or something. I don't know. We could do that.
Get a Dyson
What do you
sphere
think?
rolling.
Yeah, that's why I'm hoping functionalism and these kinds of theories are maybe sort of true. Because like, please be kind of true. Like, hopefully, then I can like be functionally equivalent, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, that's reading the end, like discussing this stuff. I wish I started from the end because it's like talking about this thing, and they're like, oh, all this other wild stuff at the very end.
Well, I mean, we're gonna, you know, we're doing a series on this for a reason.
Yeah.
And then, you know,
I have not
in the
read this full
repo, we're
paper.
actually, I think we can't compare all these theories. That's going to be impossible. So we've kind of been doing you know, a TikTok alternating schedule where, like next week, what we'll probably do, we got a AutoGen notebook up to just compare two theories, basically. And we had them like, yeah, adopt the persona and just debate it given the name. We didn't even load in the paper. So I think we're gonna complexify that next week. And then, you know, kind of a la infinite backroom style, we just want to put the conversations on the internet that the AIs are having about consciousness and the debate, because it's what is it? It's n factorial and there's 212, and 212 factorial is too many conversations to have. We just make the robots do it, maybe. I just don't think we can do it in in podcast form. 212 factorial seems like a lot of episodes. So.
And they might
Yeah.
also be tackling. This is like our chatty discussion of various topics. I think these will be more in depth. You know, some kind of guided debate between the different theories.
Yeah. Yeah. We'll do some generation together next week and
Yeah.
put it up on the lines. So that'll be fun. I'll accompany the podcast and people can dig through it and click through it and be satisfied that these two were compared and stuff like that because they've got their favorite theories, you know.
I feel like I think I disagree. I think this is a way for all of us to start learning to hate people we actually really like.
Which people?
Because we're going to argue about
said me.
consciousness and the nature of being. No, I mean, you know, I think getting in a room and arguing with
I
people
love
about
arguing
the
with my
nature of
friends. What are you
being,
talking about?
that's like what I do with my friends.
I
That's
love
why I'm
playing
friends
with
with Ryan, you know?
These are the
Like,
nature
you
you're
need
playing
to,
it as
we
a-
let's talk
you know,
about the nature of being.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
No,
Very cool.
I just to make a joke. I mean, like, you know, we're gonna have feuds from now on.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing. Like, I'll just take it back because I'm not down for that. I'm gonna take it back to the baseline of it ain't about defining the truth, and like we're allowed to have lots of different perspectives, but never marry yourself to one.
Yeah.
That is not the vibe.
No.
I've been out here long enough outside of the philosophic spheres, and like it is not about that. These are all tools, and there is no capital T truth here. So we can hang with that. that then we can start having raunchy arguments about stuff, which
That's a
yes.
critical argument. I don't think that makes any sense at all because it implies this.
Yeah. How could you possibly reconcile that? Yeah. Yeah. I love this.
Right.
This is great. Any other should we just come up with a sign off for
Yeah,
this
yeah. I
podcast?
mean, well, thanks for coming, everyone. Like, yeah,
Thanks for having me. This was great. I had a great
Yeah.
time.
I'm looking forward
It's a
to
fun
it.
discussion.
Yeah, it's
yeah,
wonderful.
it's so cool. Internet's gonna love it. Yeah, I got a lot of consciousness nerds in the chat, all the time. So it's great.
Yeah.
I love it. Anyway, all right. Well, thanks. I don't know. Hilarious sign off. Anybody got an idea?
That was it.
That was it. All right.
No, hilarious sign off.
Hilarious
Anybody got
sign-off.
an idea?
We'll fix it in
Anybody got
post. We'll
any-
fix it in post.
We'll sort it out.
I just want to say, I actually
Oh, good
believe
job.
that I'm the only unconscious person. Everyone else is, but I am not.
You have reverse solipsism. Wow.
Yeah.
I identify as not.
Everybody else, you're good. I'm just not switched on, man. I know.
I'm the zombie.
Love it.
All right.
Tell me your
Um,
secrets.